I knew something had shifted the moment my daughter-in-law walked past me in the hallway without saying good morning. Not a glance, not a nod, just the soft swish of her housecoat and the smell of her expensive shampoo, the kind I had been paying for, along with everything else in that house trailing behind her like a reminder of how invisible I had become. My name is Dorothy. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years teaching elementary school in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and I raised my son Kevin, mostly on my own after his father passed from a heart attack when Kevin was only 11. I did not complain about it then. I do not complain about it now. But I want you to understand who I was before all of this, so you understand what it cost me to become someone who stayed silent for so long. Kevin is 41. He married Renee 9 years ago. She is from a family I never quite understood, not unkind people, but people who believed that comfort was something owed to them rather than earned. Kevin loved her completely, and because I loved Kevin, I opened my arms to Renee without reservation. That was my first mistake, not loving her but loving her without protecting myself. They moved into a townhouse in the south end of Winnipeg 2 years after the wedding. The rent was more than they could comfortably carry. Kevin was working in property management, and Renee had taken a part-time position at a dental office after their daughter Lily was born. I understood the gap. I stepped in. Just temporarily, I told myself. Just until they found their footing. Temporary lasted 6 years. By the time any of this came to a head, I had contributed, and I sat down one evening and actually calculated this, because I needed to see the number to believe it myself. I had contributed just over $74,000, not in one check, not in one dramatic gesture. In installments so small and so routine that it had stopped feeling like money. It had started feeling like breathing. Natural, expected, unremarkable. Rent top-ups when Kevin's commission month was slow. Lily's daycare fees for nearly 2 full years. Renee's car payment for 8 months after she reduced her hours at the dental office. Groceries every second week. A new washer and dryer when theirs broke. 3 rounds of dental work. Not Lily's, not Kevin's, but Renee's, because they had not yet qualified for full benefits through Kevin's employer. A new laptop for Renee so she could, as she described it, look into starting a small business from home. I never saw evidence of that business. I did see the laptop at Christmas, propped open on the kitchen counter playing a Netflix series while I stood at the stove making turkey dinner for everyone. I am not telling you this to paint Renee as a villain. I am telling you this because I need you to understand the architecture of how it happened. How a person can go from being a mother who helps her son to being a source of funding that no one thinks to thank anymore. Because thanking a utility is not something most people think to do. The Thanksgiving I want to tell you about happened on a Monday. Canadian Thanksgiving, the 2nd Monday of October. I had driven over the Friday before to help with the cooking. Kevin had asked me to come early, which I was happy to do. I brought a roasting pan, 2 pies I had made from scratch, 1 apple, 1 pumpkin, a bag of sweet potatoes, and a card with $300 inside for groceries. Renee's parents were coming. Her brother and his girlfriend were coming. Her cousin and the cousin's husband. 6 people from Renee's side, not counting Renee herself. From my side, there was only me. I want to be fair about this. I knew it was going to be a larger gathering for Renee's family than for mine. Kevin had mentioned it. What I had not been told was that the cooking arrangements had quietly shifted. On Saturday morning, Renee came downstairs while I was peeling sweet potatoes at the kitchen counter. She said, casually, the way you might tell someone the weather, that her mother was bringing the main dishes. Her mother was making a full turkey, stuffing, roasted vegetables, the works. So my roasting pan was not going to be needed after all. I looked down at the sweet potatoes in my hands. I said, "Oh, that is fine. I can make these as a side dish." Renee said the vegetable dishes were covered too. I said, "Well, I have 2 pies." She smiled and said, "Yes, dessert would be lovely." I finished peeling the sweet potatoes anyway. I put them in a pot and covered them with water and set them on the stove. I did not know what else to do with my hands. On Sunday night, Renee's mother and her aunties arrived to take over the kitchen. It was their kitchen now, their meal, their gathering. I found myself sitting in the living room with Lily, reading her a picture book while the sounds and smells of a Thanksgiving I had helped pay for floated past me without invitation. Kevin came to sit beside me at one point. He squeezed my hand and said, "This is great, eh, Mom? Everyone together." I looked at my son and I thought about the 31 years I had stood in front of classrooms teaching other people's children to read. I thought about the years I drove him to hockey practice in the dark, cold Winnipeg mornings, when the temperature was 40 below, and the car took 3 tries to start. I thought about the 11-year-old boy who cried into my shoulder the night his father died and told me he was scared. And I had told him, with complete certainty I did not feel, that everything was going to be all right. I said, "Yes, it is great." On Monday, Thanksgiving dinner was served at the dining room table. It was a beautiful spread. Renee's mother is a wonderful cook, and I will not take that away from her. The turkey was golden, and the stuffing smelled of sage and butter, and the table was full of dishes and color. There were 10 of us at the table. I sat at the far end, near the kitchen doorway, which meant I was closest to the draft when someone opened the back door to let out the dog. I did not say anything about the seating. It was their home. They could arrange it as they liked. Renee's brother made a toast. He thanked Renee and her mother for the beautiful meal. He thanked Kevin for hosting. He raised his glass to the whole table. My name was not mentioned. I do not know if anyone noticed. After dinner, while the table was being cleared, I quietly brought out my 2 pies. I set them on the kitchen counter. I had driven home Friday afternoon and baked them from scratch. The apples were Cortland from the farmer's market because they hold their shape when they cook, and I had driven them back over on Saturday morning in a box so they would not shift on the seat. Renee's cousin looked at the pies and said, "Oh, are those store-bought?" I said, "No, I made them." She said, "Oh," and moved on. My pies were not served at the table. They were set to the side. Renee's mother had brought a tiramisu and a butter tart tray from a bakery in the North End, and those were the desserts that went around the table. At the end of the night I was handed my pies in the box I had brought them in. Renee said I should take them home since they would not finish everything. I carried my pies to my car in the dark. The temperature had dropped. The leaves on the elm trees along their street were the deep amber and rust of a Manitoba October, and they were beautiful, and I stood at my car door for a long moment, looking at them and breathing the cold air. I drove home. I did not cry that night. That surprised me. I had thought I might. Instead, I sat at my own kitchen table with a cup of red rose tea, and I ate a slice of my apple pie alone in my quiet house. And I thought very carefully about the number $74,000. I am a practical woman. 31 years in a classroom will do that to you. I did not want to be dramatic. I did not want to be the kind of mother who made her son feel guilty for building his own life. But I had been sitting with a feeling for a long time that I had not let myself name, and that night, in the silence of my kitchen, I finally let myself name it. I had been treated like a resource, not like a mother, not like a guest, not like a woman who had given up her own retirement savings piece by piece to keep a household running. Like a resource, something to draw from, something that could be set aside when it was not currently needed. I did not sleep well that night, but I woke up early, which is what I have always done. At 5:30 in the morning, I made tea, and I sat at my kitchen table with a notepad, and I began to write things down. I wrote down every transfer I could remember. Every e-transfer, every check, every time I had stood at the grocery store self-checkout and tapped my card. I wrote the dates and the amounts and the reasons. I had kept records, not because I expected to need them, but because I am a school teacher, and school teachers keep records. It is just what we do. When the sun came up over the rooftops of my neighborhood, I had 4 pages of notes. I also had a decision. I had a TFSA, a tax-free savings account that I had been contributing to for 12 years. I had a small work pension from the Winnipeg School Division. I had a modest RRSP. I had the house, which was paid off, which I had paid off myself over 23 years of careful, quiet living. I was not a wealthy woman, but I had built something, and I had been slowly dismantling it for 6 years without asking myself if that was what I wanted to do. That morning, I called my financial advisor. His name is Brian, and he has managed my accounts for a long time, and he does not make me feel foolish for asking questions. I told him I wanted to review my beneficiary designations. I told him I wanted to understand my options for restructuring how my assets were set up. He was calm and professional, and he asked me a few questions, and then he said he could meet me the following Thursday. I also called my friend Patricia. We have been friends for 38 years. She is 70 and sharp as a tack, and she has seen me through things that would take longer to tell than this story. I told her what had happened at Thanksgiving. Not all of it, but enough. She listened. And then she said, "Dorothy, you already know what you need to do. You just needed to say it out loud." She was right. I did not call Kevin that week. He texted me on Tuesday to say he hoped I had gotten home safely. I said, "Yes, thank you." He sent a thumbs-up emoji. That was the extent of it. The following Thursday, I met with Brian. We sat in his office on Portage Avenue with the autumn light coming through the window, and I explained what I had been doing for the past 6 years and what I wanted to change. He was thoughtful, and he did not judge me, and when I finished talking, he said, quietly, that it was not uncommon, and that what I was feeling was not unusual, and that I had more control than I perhaps realized. We restructured things. I will not go into every detail, but the short version is this. I removed Kevin as the sole beneficiary of my TFSA and my RRSP. I added my niece and a women's shelter in the north end of Winnipeg that I had been donating small amounts to for years. I began the process of updating my will with a lawyer Brian recommended, and I made a decision about the monthly transfers. They stopped. Not with a phone call, not with a confrontation, not with a letter. I simply did not send the transfer that first week of November. Then I did not send it the week after. I want to be honest with you. Stopping was harder than I expected, not because I was afraid of their reaction, but because I had been doing it for so long that my fingers actually moved toward my phone on the Friday morning out of pure habit, muscle memory. I put the phone down, and I made myself another cup of tea, and I sat very still for a few minutes. Kevin called on the 17th of November. He said, "Mom, I think there might be an issue with the transfer this month. We have not seen anything come through." I said, "There is no issue." There was a pause. I said, "Kevin, I have been sending money every month for 6 years. I need to stop now." Another pause. Then he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "I mean I cannot continue. I have my own retirement to think about. I should have said this sooner, and I am sorry that I did not." He said, "Okay, but this month is tight. The car insurance renewal just came through," and I said, "Kevin, I need you to hear me. This is not about 1 month." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he understood, and we said goodbye. And I sat with the phone in my lap and looked out my kitchen window at the bare elm tree in my backyard and felt something I had not felt in a long time. Not happiness. Not relief, exactly. Something quieter than both of those things. About 2 weeks later, Kevin came by on a Sunday afternoon. He came alone, which surprised me. I made coffee, and we sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had sat with my notepad in the dark of early morning in October, and he looked older to me somehow. Tired. He said, "Mom, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." I said, "All right," he said. "Do you feel like we have taken advantage of you?" I looked at my son. He had his father's eyes, the same gray-green color, the same way of looking at you directly when he was being serious. I had not seen him look at me that way in a long time. I said, "Kevin, I do not think you meant to." He said, "That is not what I asked." I said, "Yes. I have felt that way for a while." He put both hands around his coffee mug and he stared at the table. He told me that Lily had said something to him. Lily is 8 years old. She had apparently asked Kevin why Grandma always sat at the end of the table away from everyone at Thanksgiving. She had asked why Grandma's pies were not put out with the other desserts. She had asked, with the blunt and perfect clarity that 8-year-olds possess, why nobody said thank you to Grandma. Kevin had not had an answer for her. He told me he had been thinking about it since then. He said he realized he had let things happen around him that he should have paid more attention to. He did not make excuses, and he did not ask me to absolve him. He just said, "I am sorry, Mom. I should have been paying more attention." I reached across the table and put my hand over his. I told him that I did not need him to fight my battles. I was capable of standing up for myself, and I had been the one who allowed this to go on for as long as it had. I told him what Patricia had told me, that you teach people how to treat you, and that it is never too late to teach them something different. He stayed for 2 hours. We talked more that afternoon than we had in years. He told me things about his marriage that I will not repeat, because they are not mine to tell, but I understood more after that conversation than I had before it. When he left, he hugged me at the door, not the quick, distracted hug I had grown used to, but the real kind, the kind where you can feel that someone means it. After I closed the door, I stood in my front hallway for a moment. Then I went to the kitchen, took my apple pie out of the refrigerator. I had made another one, just for myself, because I felt like it, and I cut myself a generous slice and sat down at the table. December came, and with it a light early snow that dusted the rooftops and the elm tree and the street outside my window. Kevin called more often. He came by on a Saturday to help me put the storm windows in, which he had not done in 2 years, and he brought Lily, who sat at my kitchen table for 3 hours, making Christmas cards out of construction paper and stickers, while Kevin and I worked. At one point, Lily looked up at me and said, "Grandma, your house smells like pie. Is it apple?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Can we have some when we finish?" I said, "Yes." She went back to her cards, her small head bent over the table in concentration, her tongue at the corner of her mouth, the way Kevin's used to be when he was working on something. I stood at my kitchen counter and watched her for a moment. I thought about the $74,000. I thought about the drives in the dark at 40 below. I thought about the 2 pies I had carried to my car in the October dark and driven home alone. I thought about every silent morning I had written a number in a notebook without asking myself if it was what I wanted. And then I thought about the money still sitting in my TFSA, growing quietly and reliably, the way that careful things do when you stop spending them before they are ready. I was not bitter. I want to be clear about that. Bitterness is a cold place to live, and I have lived in cold places long enough. What I felt was something simpler and more useful. I felt like myself again, like the woman who had stood in front of classrooms for 3 decades and made things make sense for other people, like the woman who had kept the heat on and the car running and the household whole through 31 Winnipeg winters, mostly on her own, like a woman who still had time. The December light in Manitoba is thin and early setting, the kind that makes everything look still and considered. On a Tuesday afternoon, when the school buses had gone by and the street was quiet, I put on my coat and my wool hat, and I walked to the end of my block and around the corner to the small park where Kevin used to play as a boy. The bench was cold, but I sat on it anyway. I thought about something I had heard once, a long time ago, from a woman in my building who had come to Canada from the Philippines in the 1970s and who had built a life here from almost nothing, and who once told me, over tea in the hallway outside our apartments, that dignity is not something anyone can give you, and it is not something anyone can permanently take. It is something you put down, and you can always pick it back up. I had put mine down gradually, in increments so small I barely felt it happening. I had picked it back up on a dark October morning with a notepad and a cup of red rose tea and a phone call to a financial advisor named Brian. It was not a dramatic act. It was not a revenge. It was just a woman of 67 deciding that the rest of her life was going to be lived on her own terms with love in it, yes, and family in it, yes, and her son and her granddaughter in it, but also with herself in it. Fully. Finally. The snow on the park bench was powdery and clean. I brushed it off my sleeve and stood up. My knees ached a little, the way they always do in the cold now. I walked home. The kettle was still warm from the morning. I turned it on again, got out my cup, and stood at my kitchen window watching the elm tree in the yard, its bare branches holding the thin December light like something worth keeping. I thought, this is enough. This is more than enough. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it completely.